It was like Crimson Tide in space, but bloodier. That's the best way I could think to describe this movie. I went into I.S.S. not knowing a ton about it. I had forgotten actually the synopsis that I had read. And so I was expecting that it was going to be like a horror movie, like some sort of something was stalking them and killing them on the I.S.S. And when it was underway and the full plot emerges and you see what's going to be happening, I was, oh yeah, I remember. This reminds me of Crimson Tide. So the story is there's this group of astronauts on the ISS, and while they're up there, it opens up with two new additions to the space station. Two Americans that go up, a man and a woman, and they greet the astronauts that are already there. One is an American and the other three are Russians. So there's 3 Americans, 3 Russians. And while they're up there, and the story is told primarily through the eyes of the female astronaut, the new female astronaut that goes up there, because one of the Russian astronauts is also female. But we're seeing the story basically through her eyes, her perspective. And not long after they have joined the space station, gotten to know the other astronauts a bit, something horrible happens on Earth, like a nuclear war, and they can see it from the space station. And each of them, and this is part of the synopsis, you guys, so I'm not giving you any spoilers, I'm just giving you the setup for the plot. Each of them receive orders from their respective governments to take control of the ISS. So it becomes this sort of psychological battle and also a physical battle in different respects between these groups of people. And you see their loyalties are shifting and faltering, and they are torn. They don't know what to do. Sometimes there's a little bit too, maybe they're too reactionary, and there's horrible stuff that goes down throughout the course of the movie. It's not necessarily a bunch of blood and violence all the time, because a lot of it is really more in your mind. Like, you're just thinking about this horrible situation that they're in, knowing that there's this terrible thing happening back home and they're stuck up there in space. They've lost transmission, their space station, what's going to happen to them if the whole world destroys itself, and why do they need to take control of the ISS? What the heck is going on? Do they have family to go back to? So it's horrifying to think about. And for me, just the setting, the environment, right away for me, that sets up a horrifying scenario. Because while I think being able to float weightlessly through the air is cool, the idea of space travel actually terrifies me. You couldn't pay me to get on a rocket and go up into space. You just couldn't. There are too many factors that could go wrong. Now, I know statistically it's probably safer than me driving down the road to go to the movie theater and watch a doggone movie, but I don't care. It scares me. And the thought of being up there, what if something happens with the equipment? What if? And scenes like spacewalk scenes always frighten me, unless it's a dumb movie and it annoys me, and then I don't give a crap about the characters. But when I feel invested in the characters and I care about them, and I cared about these characters for the most part. You had some that were a little bit more antagonistic in nature than others, but they weren't necessarily bad people. None of these people were necessarily bad. They were just in this really horrible situation. And the whole time I'm watching this movie, there's a scene at the beginning where the main, I don't even remember her name. Shoot. I don't remember the girl's name. But the new one that comes on board, she brings these mice because there's these experiments she's going to be running, and she puts the mice in the little place, and they're, kind of floating all in air, and so it's adorable and everything. And she's trying to teach them how to hold on to the wire so they're not floating. And the next day, or at some point later, I think it's the next day, they have attacked one another, or some of them have attacked each other. And that was definitely some foreshadowing going on. I thought This was before I realized what the full synopsis was or what was really going down. I thought, oh, did some sort of creature do this to them? No, it's nothing like that. There's nothing supernatural going on in this film. Not that that was a disappointment. I was fine. It was fine because the movie, to me, I felt like it was pretty good. I was surprised at how solid it felt to me. Now, I've seen comparisons to another movie or something called, maybe it's a game called Among Us. I have no idea what this is. So, but I guess I looked it up and it looks like something happening in space. So I don't know. Maybe it is a very similar scenario, but it reminded me in a lot of ways of Crimson Tide. Now, Crimson Tide is probably maybe a better movie. I don't know, honestly. This one wasn't bad. I can't really say that this was a bad movie. It just felt very, very similar in nature. You have people that are in a situation, except the ending was different, but you have people that are in this situation where they're contained in this location, and for all they know, the world is being completely destroyed in a totally different, and they're not there. They're completely isolated. So those were the similarities for me between those two movies. This film effectively made me very tense and uptight. There were parts where I was thinking, I just want this to be over because I am so tense. There's a spacewalk scene. It made me tense. They always make me tense. And just the claustrophobic nature of where they are and the tensions between them. I was just so ready for it to be over. I'm not saying that in a bad way. That's actually a good thing because it really had me invested and I was really very emotionally connected with what was happening. And I appreciated that about this film. It's not very long. It's only about an hour and 35 minutes. So obviously by the time credits start, it's really only about an hour and 30 or less. I left while the credits were running. I don't think there was anything post credits. So I felt like it did a really good job. The pacing was effective. It made this hour and a half of time feel like it was so much longer because of the stuff that was happening, just the environment and the whole situation and like what was going to happen. And there were moments that were kind of drawn out a bit. Like it didn't feel that there were some parts that were super rushed and too much stuff was happening. There was this slow escalation of things, and it would sort of be drawn out between some of the characters. And you're like, oh, you don't know who to trust and who's going to stab someone in the back, figuratively and potentially literally. And I felt like it did a really good job of pulling me in. And then there was also this one scene, the spacewalk scene, and it made me very, very tense. But at the same time, so these two characters are talking to each other in this scene, the one outside and the one inside. And the one inside who's doing the talking is speaking in a very calming voice to try to relax the person on the outside. You guys, I got some serious ASMR. I was just like, oh, that's so calming. Thank you, because I'm very, very tense throughout this scene right now. And this calming voice is helping me. I don't know. I was like, okay, that stood out to me. I know, random, but things like voice tone and the suaveness or the smoothness of a voice. And this person that was talking, the way they were talking in that particular scene, it was just so calming and so relaxing to me. And it didn't last a huge amount of time, but it was something that stood out to me. I don't know if that was intentional, but maybe it's just me. It got me. Those are the pros to this film. I don't have a ton of cons, honestly. Maybe one of the main cons is that the ending, it felt like it was only a partial resolution. You get an immediate resolution to the situation, but there's still this doom and gloom that's looming over the story in this world. And so honestly, I don't know really. It might be unfair to call that a con. I don't know what they could do to make that any better because the overall story was terrible. And then you had this immediate situation with the people on the I.S.S. and that was bad. And then that part comes to an end, and then, okay, well, it's done. That story is done. You don't necessarily find out much beyond that. And so that felt maybe just a skosh disappointing, but it's like I said, I really don't know what could have been done to have made that ending better. So while I put that in the con category, that was just kind of like an emotional reaction I had to the way it ended. It is a bit unfair to call it a con, so take that with sort of a grain of salt, I guess. You know, I suppose it just depends on the way you like things to end. And I don't know. Maybe it was just I was so caught up in the story and so invested in the characters. And when it was over, it just kind of made me feel a bit sad about things and just, I don't know. Maybe you'll know what I'm talking about when you see it. Another con, this is also very minor. There's a scene where there's a serious fight that happens and there's an injury that occurs. And in one of the shots, you see no blood in a location on the person where the injury happened. That's just a very superficial, technical type of con, nothing huge. And then the last con, which also isn't huge, it is something that jumped out at me and made me go a little bit inside when it happened. And this was during a point of dialogue between two characters. And it was an important scene because they were each talking about certain things in their life that had kind of, I guess, brought them to this moment, or certain things that were important in their life. Whatever. I'm going to be really vague, but it's not that it wasn't an important scene or a moment between these two people. It was important, but there was a line of dialogue that jumped out at me. It was just like, okay, come on now. That's kind of silly. Was one of the characters was talking about their romantic partner, and the other one made the assumption that this person that was talking to them was referring to a member of the opposite sex, and this person wasn't because this person's gay. Okay, whatever. All right, you are. But then the person that found out that they had been mistaken about this situation is like, oh, I'm an idiot. And I'm like, no, you're not. It's perfectly normal and natural to assume that the person you're talking to about their romantic life is referring to a member of the opposite sex because most people are heterosexual. There's nothing idiotic to make this leap in logic or guess. That part, that one line was like where he said, I'm an idiot. That was just like, no, you could have just completely omitted that line. You could have just been like, oh, okay. All right. So this person was not hetero. Okay. I don't know what that one stupid line. It was just like, okay, why did you even insert that particular comment in there? That felt like a little drop of messaging going on there, which I don't know. I just thought it was kind of a bit silly, but that is probably the extent of the cons I have for this movie, because other than that little blip on the radar, there really wasn't any of that stuff happening. There wasn't like any sort of agenda messaging or any sort of wokeness or anything like that. So I'm not mentioning this to you to make you think that, oh my gosh, I'm going to stay away. No. It wasn't like that. It was just this little moment, and I was just like, okay, the writers on that line, they could have left that off. But for the most part, I felt like this was a solidly done psychological thriller. You could in a way call this a horror, but not in the typical sense, because it wasn't. It was psychologically horrifying, the thought of just the situation on the earth and what these people were dealing with in the I.S.S. But I felt like it was crafted pretty well. I enjoyed it. And I'm curious to find out, if you guys decide that you want to watch it, how you felt about it. It's really funny because sometimes I'll watch things and I'll really enjoy them, and then other people that I'm friends with on YouTube, they'll watch it and they'll be like, "No, I didn't care for that," you know. And I find it interesting, the different levels of appreciation or lack of appreciation that we can have about these different stories. I think it's cool how different stories affect different people, but I enjoyed this. This was probably, I feel like this movie was the most solid big screen film I've seen so far this year. Granted, I've only seen 3 on the big screen this year, but it was better than Night Swim. It was definitely better than The Beekeeper. So far, this is the best film I've seen on the big screen. Yeah, I know, it's just January. We have Argyle coming up in a couple weeks, but it's early on. But this one, I can't say that this was a disappointment, and I'm glad I watched it. I feel like this is just like this quiet little film that slid its way into the January schedule, and I hope that people don't feel like it's something not worth taking the time to check out because it's a January release. I mean, whether you want to see it on the big screen or not, I liked it enough to want to talk about it with you guys, and let me know what you think if you watch it. Okay, that's it for this one. Wrapping it up. We'll see you guys later. Nos vemos.